How's it going, everyone?
When you're pushing back on your opponent and who you're discussing things with or talking back to, I think that can indirectly be harmful and get people on another side to go to that person and lean with their ideals and have a pretty much a backfire with what you're going for.
Yeah, so you're basically positing the platforming conundrum of essentially, are you, by engaging with opposite harmful idea, are you facilitating the pipeline that brings people towards that idea in the first place? And are you like, what's your role essentially and responsibility in that? I think it's a really good question. In general, the pipeline argument I tend to reject personally. I'm kind of the view that people who are going to be drawn towards a certain viewpoint will find it, whether it's through me or through something else. And so by barring myself from being able to engage with that idea, I essentially view free discourse. I think dialogue between opposing sides is more important than like the element of contribution I have to the pipeline, because essentially I would argue the pipeline happens regardless of what I do. And so I think essentially the pros of engaging with these ideas, pushing back, but also showing people of these ideas a more sane, rational position that they might find compelling, essentially the reverse pipeline, because I think pipelines go in two directions, I think is worth it, essentially.
I agree with basically everything you said. Like, I do agree that people are going to find these bad rhetorics regardless if you're speaking against those rhetorics to begin with. And they can come to those conclusions via another source or an output panel. But I think when it comes to that, don't you think in general, not just you specifically, but everybody in any given debate space when making content or response videos or anything, whatever, should be at least I feel like people should generally be a lot more picky with on who they respond to and to awareness of who they're speaking to, like in terms of an audience. I feel like what's concerning in this day and age when it comes to any sort of literacy discourse is that it's getting significantly worse with how people take things in. And I'm trying to figure out how to best put it, but people already lean towards a preemptive bias when it comes to a rhetoric. And if that bias is harmful, regardless of how much logic you approach to the discussion or how much rationale you give it, people will still, oh, you're wrong, or oh, you lost the debate. For people, I notice it's not really about whether or not they're logically or fairly or reasonably there. It's more so about, haha, fuck you, I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple of concepts baked in there, right? Which is essentially the utility. There's a bit of a utility argument that you're making there of essentially, well, isn't it the case that so many people will watch this and they won't move? Yes. With the Jay Dyer debate, one thing I would be cautious about is if you notice his videos and specifically his appearances, Jay Dyer is unquestionably botting his views in his comment sections. So if you go to like a Piers Morgan showing where he was on a couple of month ago or just in the past at some point recently, if you look at the comment section, it's pretty evident to anyone who's familiar with content creation that he is botting, right? So one
Right.
thing you have to do is be cautious about assuming how much people are or are not moving from a debate, because it's not self-evident immediately just on the chatter and the commentating that you hear. So for example, as a result of the whatever debate, I've gained almost 1,000 followers on Twitter alone. And I think I've gained 200 on YouTube, despite not really posting that much on YouTube or driving people there. Jay, despite being in a space that is positive towards his position and he's saying things that they're already warmed up to because they're very similar to what Andrew Wilson says, he was, last I checked his social blade, he hasn't even gained 100, right? So we should be cautious with the first thing of assuming how strong the pipeline is going just from comments alone. Number two, I guess there's this interesting question of essentially, how do you engage online ethically with toxic discourse? And I
Right.
guess I'd pose the question to you. What do you think is the correct, most ethical way to engage with extreme Christian nationalist monarchists who want to do away with democracy and women's rights?
Well, I mean, naturally loaded question, but I think it's really important to something that I wholeheartedly believe in is being able to solidify your position with good logic and reasoning, because it makes you stronger, it makes you look better, it makes you not even just look better, but it solidifies you as one a person and what you represent.
Mhm.
But when it comes to having to discuss that and kind of like reach and build a bridge with somebody who's so opposite of the way you operate, who's not even there, I
Yeah.
feel like you run risk of like losing yourself if you're not properly prepared for whatever discussion you're about to go into. And I notice when it comes to talking to people on such an extreme side of any spectrum, whether it be the left or the right, is that, like I said earlier, is that they've got such a pre-baked scary bias to the point where, again, all logic and rationale is and reasoning is like it won't matter what you hit them with. They're still gonna just disregard it or find some weird like autistic schizo way of like
Yeah.
logic leaping their way to another conclusion. So like when you ask me like what's the best way, I feel like it's kind of I feel like you already kind of do that in people you've already spoken to. You guys already kind of approach it in the best way. But the reason I bring this up to begin with is because I feel like in a lot of circumstances, like for instance, whatever podcasts and stuff like that, it can ultimately, even if it'll reward you, like you said, a lot of followers, right? And a bigger audience, that's great. But at the same time, what can the other side reward? And like with the ever growing amount of like people outing themselves as crazies and neo-Nazis and shit like that, I feel like I feel like it's kind of a no-win situation where like, okay, if I engage with it and I'm, if I handle this pretty much perfectly and solidify my stance and what matters to me, it's not going to matter because all these crazy unhinged people are still going to go back to what they think is real to them, and they're going to just say I'm crazy, and they're just going to disregard everything I've said to them. And I think that's what solidifies the whole thing as kind of a lose-lose scenario when it comes to one, successfully changing minds, even if you do, and then two, just not using a kind of dangerous game where you accidentally lose yourself, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yes. There's kind of a lot that you just said there. So pause me if I'm not answering kind of your whole thoughts. I think what you're kind of basically outlining is logic is going to be insufficient on these individuals. And so it's kind of a like, yeah, I'm getting exposure, I'm getting follows and stuff like that. I'm getting my name out there, but fundamentally I'm not really changing minds. I'm just kind of performing for my side, making my side feel good and doing nothing to move anyone on their side. So there's kind of two things here. Number one, is it good to move people toward my side? My answer would actually be no. I don't really care about moving people to my position. I actually mostly care about people moving away from extremism, right? And so I think how you do that in large part, there's a couple of answers. Dr. K said this in the Bridges episode that we had with him a while back, but he essentially, when we were asking him about the value of going on these shows and engaging with them, because Stephen was very doomer-pilled about it, Dr. K kind of pointed out that if you go onto these shows and somebody has a paradigm that says all liberals are stupid and don't know what they're talking about, and at the end of the debate they go, okay, well, at least that one liberal, that one liberal isn't stupid. I still disagree with them, but at least there's
Right.
one. A lot of people would dismiss that and be like, okay, so they think one person's smart. But what you've actually done at a psychological level is you have broken an essentialist paradigm, because there is no such thing as a good woman it's a much more difficult mindset to break than, well, there's at least one. Because if there's at least one, there can always be two, right? And so if I can go on, and for a lot of these like young angry men, they can go, okay, all women are stupid. And then they go, well, there's at least one woman who's kind of smart. That to me is a huge W. It's a huge, 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 huge W, because I think most extremism is solved by exposure and by like community. So if I can pull them from viewing all women to stupid to open, maybe there's one, maybe there's two, that individual at a psychological level is already predisposed to start behavioral seeking to see if there's more than just one, right? A secondary thing, I think the left tried this mentality of platforming where it said we're not going to engage with people with toxic, harmful ideas. And I think we did that from like 2016 to kind of 2022. And we just canceled them off all the platforms so we didn't have to hear them. And I think we told ourselves that that made us win. Like we were winning the culture war. But I feel
If I could pause you there for like a quick second, do you feel like with how the culture has changed and how because I could definitely be wrong on this, but from what I've noticed online, especially carrying on to YouTube and stuff like that, it's kind of becoming more and more normalized at a kind of scary rate how socially acceptable it is to like lean into these more far right toxic talking points like the whole all women are stupid type of thing or the all the politics from the right leaning stuff that goes on.
Mhm.
I feel like don't you think the answer I don't think the answer should be to like completely shut them all off because that kind of does solidify the one thing that I'd say the right loves to lean into is, oh, the left always wants to cancel you. But I feel like there are kind of some instances where we as left-leaning people are kind of right for being down to cancel people who will proudly say, oh, maybe Hitler didn't do anything wrong and shit like that. Like, don't you feel like maybe we should probably go back to that just a little bit?
I basically, so there's a pretty classic study that I always cite, which tracked Reddit users who were on incel forums and that were banned from Reddit, and it tracked their movement as to like where they went essentially after being banned off of their main platform. And it was about a 65% transference to Gab, which is just like a much more open free speech version of Reddit, more or less. And so, yeah, about 35% of people didn't go to Gab. They probably just went elsewhere, and they may be moderated because they entered into communities that were more moderate. The problem is that a more than 50% group of them went to Gab, and when you tracked their language use, they were significantly more extreme, more violent, and like more toxic in the ways that we would describe it than they were on Reddit, and were increasingly so over like the year's time that they spent on Gab versus the year's time that they were on Reddit for the scope of this study. They were obviously on Reddit for longer than that, which shows essentially this concern, which is echo chambering, right? When you cancel a bunch of people, the idea
It only makes them worse.
well, it makes them worse in a very specific way. Are you familiar with Hannah Arendt's totalitarian framework?
No, not at all.
No
No.
worries. Super esoteric. You don't need to be. I can explain it to you.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
No,
no,
you're good. You're
yeah,
good. Yeah.
sorry.
No, you're good. So she has this idea of looking at totalitarian regimes like onions. And essentially, totalitarian regimes, I'm going to use her metaphor to explain what I think happens in radicalization as well, and echo chambers. So in a totalitarian regime, or I think in an echo chamber, everyone within the onion has the same opinion, but the people on the outsides of the onion are the most reasonable versions of that. Whereas as you get towards the center, it's more crazy. And so when you're getting pulled into an echo chamber, when you start out, you're probably mostly going to be surrounded by semi-reasonable people to people slightly more extreme than you. But you would probably not fuck with people who are super extreme. But the problem is that as you get accepted into the social culture, you tend to trickle inwards over time, so that what feels normal is increasingly more extreme. And then what feels extreme, you get used to a little bit more until again you shift right again. And this is how Hannah Arendt argues that totalitarian regimes become extremely radicalized in their own worldview, whether they're far left or far right. And I think that this is true for what we see in the online space. So when we shift them all into an echo chamber where they can only talk to each other, I think we've created a necessary pipeline where they become so much worse. And then what happens is that a billionaire's daughter hurts his feelings and becomes trans. He buys Twitter, and suddenly all of these people that the left had canceled and we all got to pretend didn't exist anymore came flooding back. And Twitter is worse than it has ever been before. It is insane.
But
Yeah.
don't you feel like, in that case, in that instance right there, don't you feel like that was kind of, I don't even know if I'd want to put that in line of like a situation of circumstances. That was kind of just like the guy who happened to have a shitload of money to spend and essentially completely rearrange an entire platform for the worse, right? I don't know how I don't know. There's nothing that, anybody on the spectrum could have done to like prevent that or change that. We don't even know at least I don't really know what a guy like Elon Musk was really thinking back in, say, like 2018 when things were significantly different than they are now.
Yeah. And so this is where I'm going to get to purely my speculation. So I could be wrong, just to be clear. My speculation when I look at all of this is that the right has been very effective at pulling people in and embracing them, and the left has been extremely effective at chasing people out. For example, there is no Tulsi Gabbard of the left. There is no politician, speaker who went from being moderate left to kind of like a crazy version of, I think, moderate right. I don't even know all of her positions, but like, regardless, who's gone to the right. And it was the greatest career decision she could have ever made. It has been nothing but fruitful. She has been embraced with nothing but welcoming arms. There's no opposite of that. If you are on the left, all you can do is prove your purity or be kicked out, right? And so I think what the left did with this cancel culture energy and the morality that got attached to it is we made it so that the pipeline is to the right because we won't accept refugees from the left. We will not do it. And so when I look at Twitter and Elon Musk, one of the questions I pose is, what did we do to drive Elon so hard away from the left? And I think one of the things that we did is refuse to talk to people. We refused to talk to them. And when we did talk to them, we just like put them up as pariahs, treated them like evil people, labeled them with the worst names that we could think of, and shunned them. I mean, Jordan Peterson is a great example of this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got a really good point. Damn, this is actually like this is kind of like the greatest for me to be able to like have this discussion. But I don't really have that much time. But one more significant thing that I kind of want to pose to you is as because I consider myself a fairly deep liberal, but I don't like to at all align with left extremists. I consider myself a lot more than just left leaning, but not like too crazy on like every single instance of something that I don't like. But when it comes to being a lefty, what would you say, I guess in kind of looking for your advice, what would you say when it comes to, I notice whenever I speak on things, I kind of have to solidify my own backbone to acknowledge that, like what I've been painting to you is that no matter how much of a empathetic I like to see things in, it frustratingly gets chased away no matter how
Steven the
reasonably I
Audio
am, no
super
matter how
chatted
rational I
$10.
am,
Love
and it
to see
sucks
you
having to
streaming
deal with
again.
it from both
One
the right
criticism I
and then
want to get
also
though
the
is that
extreme left,
sometimes when you use
in which
advanced
a lot of them
vocab in
I would
debates, you
share a
might
lot
get a
of worldviews
pretentious
with
vibe,
being
which can make
left,
people shut their
but it
brains
also
off.
contributes back to, I feel like when I have a moral backbone that I try to establish, it runs a greater risk of more harm than good towards me. So I guess I'm asking you, for you, what is it like having to deal with that, and what really pushes you to kind of, get back to what sounds your, like your beliefs and what you know between right is right and wrong is wrong in that sense, if that question makes sense.
I think so. I'm going to attempt to answer it and then stop me if I'm not answering you. So
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
me, debate is like almost a sacred process for me. I care about debate a lot because when I enter debates, to this day, I genuinely enter them assuming that my position will be broadened, deepened, and fleshed out more, right? That I enter debates being willing to be moved on certain things, to bite bullets and acknowledge where like my opposition is correct. Because by doing so, I think I flesh out my own worldview more. And I'll be the first to say, I don't think 2025 debates look like good faith debates very
Yeah, there.
often. They're pretty
Yeah.
bad. But what they do is they develop skills. They do flesh out my rhetoric. So, for example, walking away from the Jay versus Jim Bob. Jim Bob behind the scenes is actually a really nice guy. He's really funny, like genuinely very funny. He just seems like kind of a nice dad. Which is a little mindfucky where you're like, why do you say the things that you do? Like, how much do you believe it? Whereas like Jay was
Right.
just, it just kind of sucks, like in every way, shape, or form. And so there's a fleshing out that happened, for example, in like the public Twitter dunking I was willing to do on both of them, where there was certain things that like hurt Jim Bob's feelings that I was willing to remove. Whereas with Jay, I don't think I would give a fuck about anything that would hurt his feelings, because I don't think that I'm dealing with like a reasonable person with feelings that I care about in any meaningful way. And it tests to some degree the litmus of like when I'm willing to, for example, engage in bad faith. There has to be an answer to that, because I'm not going to infinitely engage in good faith debate. So when is bad faith useful? How do you use it effectively? And when should you use it? Right. And so it's like, even though neither of those two fleshed out my thinking about feminism or patriarchy, which would have been more interesting, it still had utility in fleshing out, okay, well, when my opponent is being purely bad faith, once they realize that they probably can't engage on the ideas with the ideas themselves, now it's an optics game. And so I have to be willing to potentially utilize bad faith at certain times to ensure that I'm winning optics games, because if I win optics games, I might pull people to my side still, and I make his side look worse. And that's still decently not a bad idea to do. Did that answer your question in any way of like essentially what I got from it? Because I don't know if you were asking what I got from it.
No, no, it did. It did. The only part that it kind of didn't answer was the whole moral backbone thing that I wouldn't shut up about. When it comes to like understanding that, for a personal anecdote for me is that when I do speak, like I said, when I speak on things, I notice I'm still gonna get a load of backlash either way, no matter how much nuance I pour in. And I guess it kind of comes to like a motivational thing, or like how much of it are you really willing to commit to and not back down from? Is just I guess in that sense I'm just asking like what kind of keeps you determined on that, no matter how discouraging or annoying it can get on that side. If that did that part
Yeah.
make a little more sense?
Yeah, it does. I think as well, it's really important for people to realize that the debates that occur with an audience you shouldn't be taking all of the tactics that we use in an audience setting to personal debates, right? The debates that you have with your family and friends, which you should do. You should you wouldn't call them formal debates. You'd call them like disagreements essentially, but disagreements are basically just casual forms of debates. And so,
Right, and how you would speak to somebody, like who's a well-known figure online and whatever is completely different from how you would speak to a coworker at work. Yeah,
or your
I
mom.
get that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So for the online side, I'm not going to lie, I very much view online debates like sorcery battles almost, like it's like a battle of the minds, and I love competition. And so it feels like a way that I get to compete in like a battle of the minds. And the battle of the minds at the best is two good faith people like fleshing out ideas more. And I think best when people are countering me, even in good faith. So in the best, it's two minds battling to try to find a better answer at the end. And at the worst, it's two minds battling, and I hopefully get some like solid plays in that my team can vote for. At an interpersonal level, I'm not gonna lie, I hate debating at an interpersonal level, like with my mom and stuff like that. I just like Nick will do it with his family a ton, and he like really values it, and it's probably a good thing to do. I actually don't have the backbone for the interpersonal stuff nearly as much as I do for like the online stuff, because the online stuff feels a bit more like sport to some degree, meaningful sport. Not that sports aren't meaningful. Does that make sense?
But yeah, but that's like what kind of sucks though, right? Because and again, we're different people, so I'm gonna look at it differently than you are. But like morality really means a lot to me, because it's not about like, oh, haha, I'm right, you're wrong, fuck you, I win. It's more about what is right, what is wrong. How can we overall as people and as a society overall make this world a better place? As gay and soy as that sounds,
Mm-hmm.
that shit matters to me a lot.
Yeah.
And when I see people like you, when I see people like Destiny and stuff like that, you guys do this so well, but at the exact same time, no matter what you guys say, no matter how well you do what you do, there's still an overwhelming amount, and maybe it could just be a loud minority of people who will still either dismiss or be extremely butthurt about what you said. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not like it's an amount of people that are just like, oh, okay, I can look at this person and he's just like a fucking moron and he's insane and there's no hope. There's a lot of people like this, and it's
Yep.
like,
There
it
are.
kind of makes you wonder, like, one, what could be done better, and two, is it, I don't want to say is it worth it, but like more like, yeah, more so just like what could be done better, but at the same time it kind of just feels, as depresso vibes as it sounds, it kind of just feels kind of hopeless. But at the same time, with what you said earlier, if you could change that one mind, then that one mind turns into two. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's, yeah.
When it comes to like the hope pilling, I'm not gonna lie, watching like mega people in my personal life defend like tariffs and then defend the Qatar plane and then defend the deportation of people with explicit rules that you're not allowed to deport them. It's been a little it's a little depressing. You know, I think our thinking quality as a nation is at an all-time low. But
Well, yeah.
hope is a tactical necessity. So I think I do my best essentially to participate in the sport and art of debate as ethically as possible. I hope that that changed minds. I try to give other content creators opportunities that come across me that would suit them better, to try to help them change minds in the ways that they can, because they'll be effective with people that I can't be. I kind of like view it in the way that I view like mental health, which is basically like I try to help in the bubbles and spaces that I can. I try to do my best and I try to like maintain my values through all of it. So like in all of it, I don't want to become a shitty person so that my side wins, because I don't really have a
Right.
side. I don't really care. I don't care if you're liberal or conservative. I care if you like think well and like treat others with dignity. Like that's what I care about, which unfortunately I don't think many conservative people are doing. But to be fair, I don't think leftists have done that for a long time. So
Yeah, and you don't want to stumble onto making generalizations. So I get it. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to ask. This was a super duper ultra fulfilling conversation that I never thought I'd get to have with someone like you. So
cool.
thank you very, very much, and hopefully I can speak to you again about either this
Aim
or
super
another
chatted
topic worthwhile.
$10. Rebellions are
Thank you
built
so
on
much.
hope. Smile.
Have a good day.
Let's do trans issues. I love fighting for my trans friends.
Okay. I would refer to myself, relatively speaking, like a social conservative, economically progressive type.
Interesting.
If that's oversimplification of
I
my
getcha.
worldview.
Yeah. That's fine. Okay, interesting. So you're like pro welfare state, but you like don't love the LGBTQ stuff.
Don't love is it's well, they dress really well, so I love their outfits.
Okay, okay. Gotcha.
No, my specific issue or regarding trans issues is just the belief, or that I should believe that they exist when I don't. Right? Like, I'm willing to respect Christians, I'm willing to respect atheists, I'm willing to respect these people, but I don't believe that they're telling the truth. Right? I'm Muslim.
Gotcha. Okay. Sure. So what's the debate specifically? Like
I guess,
convince you
right, I'm
that
just
trans
asking.
people are real, or like, because I think trans people are telling the truth. I think trans people legitimately are trans. It's a real construct. It's a real experience, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, believing in trans people is really half the conversation of trans affirmative care and trans people in women's spaces. This is like a whole separate conversation. You could be in favor of one of these things and be against the other two. Like these, all these entire three parts are separate from each other.
I agree. What are you wanting to talk about though? Which you can choose.
Okay, so from my perspective, I guess I would refer to a woman and a man as somebody who's capable of producing large or small gametes, or somebody with an active SRY gene.
Right. Yeah. So you don't.
Relatively speaking, or an XX.
Right. So you don't make a separation between like gender and sex, essentially.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Gotcha. So then, like,
So if I'm transphobic, like what would your elevator pitch be to convince me?
I mean, it's interesting. How do you feel about the government being involved in your private life? Like telling you who you can marry, telling you who you can worship?
I I feel like the government has some say in the matter constantly. Like if a husband decides to reproduce against his wife, against her will, I would say the government should have a say in that matter.
Do you mean like SA her?
Yes.
Gotcha. Sure. Okay, so I'm assuming barring crimes, you'll probably, I could be wrong. Barring crimes, do you think that the government should probably allow private adults to by and large do what they want, assuming that they're not infringing on other people's rights?
I think the statement crimes kind of begs the question here.
How so?
Like, so from a religious person's perspective, it is an infringement on my right that there is an immoral action another individual is committing, right?
How is it an infringement
Or
on
no?
your? I would totally disagree. Like as a Christian, so as somebody else who's religious, if somebody else does sin, like cheats, it does not affect my faith, my salvation. It doesn't affect me in any other way other than being like, oh, that's not good. You know, you and Jesus are gonna have a fine time chatting about that one, I guess.
Okay, let me. Sorry if this hypothetical sounds a bit excessive, but would you be okay with a couple wanting to cannibalize each other?
Probably at a functional level to some degree, I'm kind of okay with it, but I understand why our government bars it.
So okay, I'm being a little annoying here. Yeah, sure. The government shouldn't have a say in whether or not gay couples can get married. Sure.
Yeah.
What's the next question?
Okay, so if the government should not get involved on like what private adults do, if you're granting me that, essentially to me, because you said I have an issue with other people doing sin. So then do you have an issue with trans people existing and transitioning? And if their insurance opts to pay for their surgeries, do you have a problem with any of that? Like, do you think the government should prevent adults from transitioning?
I mean, that would be dependent on whether or not we believe in if I believe in trans affirmative care or not. I would say that if I don't believe in trans people, sorry, not trans affirmative care, trans people. If I don't believe in trans people, then I would say that it's probably okay for trans people to get trans affirmative care because it's basically plastic surgery at this point. And if it's plastic surgery, then
Oh, you're roboting. Oh, pause. So sorry. You're roboting super hard. We'll keep trying, and then if your audio clips again, I'll just have to switch to a new person, just as a heads up. I'm not sure if you went somewhere else in your house, but your audio clipped completely out. So,
sorry. I leaned back on my chair.
I want to focus on you and your perspective, because you're the person I'm debating, right? So, do you believe that trans people should have access to trans care?
If trans people are not real, from my perspective, which is what I believe,
Okay.
I would say that trans affirmative care can be legal for adults.
But not for children in any way, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because I would constitute it as the same thing as plastic surgery. So what your position on plastic surgery is, that would be, that's dependent on your viewpoint on plastic surgery. Because if trans people are not real, it would fall under the category of plastic surgery, I believe.
So say a 16-year-old wants to get a nose job. They're not trans. They just want to get the nose job. And their parent is like, yeah, go get the rhinoplasty. I'll sign off on it. I'm totally fine with it. Are you fine with that 16-year-old getting a nose job?
I would say the adult age, generally speaking, there becomes a gray area between 16 to 20. So to kind of make the hypothetical on my perspective a little bit more underage, I would say a 14-year-old, probably not. But for a 16-year-old, I'm probably willing to be a bit more passive.
Okay. So say, what about for a 14-year-old? Not a nose job. They just want to get a little bit of filler in their lips. So it's not a full surgery. No, 14-year-olds can't get filler in their lips.
No. Yes, they can't get filler in their lip.
What about a tattoo?
No.
What about ear piercings?
Yes.
Why can they get ear piercings but not a tattoo? If with their parents' consent.
I
Again,
don't
all
think-
this is presuming parental consent.
Yeah, of course. I guess for me, I think there's a level of social element in play here. So if we reach a point where tattoos are like considered socially acceptable to give to children, probably I would then concede that that's okay.
So as long as I, as an adult, do enough lobbying and advocacy so that everyone is more chill about tattoos on kids, you'd be fine with a 14-year-old getting parental consent to get a tattoo.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So as long as I do enough social advocacy, would you be fine with me, if I can convince all of society to be okay with it, with 14-year-olds getting puberty blockers?
It's a little bit of a harder question because it's very unintuitive for me for what's the word? Hormone therapy or puberty blockers or hormone therapy to be positive for children. Because like, what if you lobby and say cocaine is normal for children to take, right? Maybe, I don't know your opinion on drugs, but like, let's say adults can do drugs, but children can't.
I would just say
that, even if it results in positive reception, yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I would basically just say cocaine is disanalogous to puberty blockers, which is why I'm okay with puberty blockers with parental consent and doctor's advice, but not cocaine, because puberty blockers seems to be medically helpful for people who are genuinely trans, and it does seem to have long-term benefits to their mental health, whereas cocaine doesn't seem to have any specific medicinal value. It just makes them feel good acutely.
I feel like you're arguing from the perspective that you think trans people are real. But like, I'm arguing from my perspective where trans people are not real. I would say that to them it is a drug. It's just that the people that detransition, they just got off of it.
Okay, we can go into the trans people are real then, if I can make the case for it, essentially, since I'm giving you my elevator pitch. So I'm not sure if you've seen the data. There's... let's focus on adult data for now. We'll tackle kid data. And the reason I'm saying let's focus on adult data is most of the data on kids is pretty weak. It's super biased. There's kind of pro-trans research and very anti-trans research and not a lot of just like pure science going on. And it's also typically blended with non-binaryism for adolescents. So I think it's really muddy, murky, shitty data. So I won't even talk about teens. I'm just going to talk about trans adults existing. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm not sure how you disentangle. So there was a study done. It's a very robust study, very high quality study that looked at essentially trans people over time. And it looked specifically at trans people who transitioned medically through multiple different interventions. And it rated their suicide attempts over time versus trans people who did not transition at all. And essentially what it found is that trans people who transitioned had a 60% reduction in suicide attempts. And I think about a 20% reduction in like completions versus those who didn't get any medical treatment. So I guess my question to you would be, if it is the case, and I'm not sure if you're familiar much with psychological research and whatnot, but a 60% reduction in suicide rates from a medical intervention like that in a psychological disorder is a very robust, large finding, just to give you like some level of, which you'd have to grant me. Obviously, you could disagree with that, but it's a very large finding. Huge. We don't have anything even closely similar to schizophrenia interventions for suicide or bipolar, for example. If it is the case that it's the medical transition that is preventing and saving these individuals from suicide, what would you say is contributing to the suicidality if not transness? Because the only difference is the medical transition to the other gender.
I don't understand the last question that you just asked. Can you rephrase?
Sure. So essentially, if you grant me this study, what could explain the effects of the two groups, the transition group and non-transition group, if transness wasn't real and wasn't being somewhat treated with the transition?
I mean, I guess to me, it just seems like, okay, I'm going to give a separate analogy here. Let's say that there is a bunch of men that have penile cancer and they've had to remove their penises. Let's just assume that. And 1,000 men are going to the doctor and they're saying that I'm suffering from something. I'm sorry, my dick hurts. Let's just say that they're saying that. I need whatever dick relief pills, whatever. So 900 of them, 1,000 of them take dick relief pills, even though they don't have one anymore. And because of that, 60% of suicide rates went down. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that those people who had penis cancer have penises now after they got it chopped off?
Oh, I feel like I'm not understanding the question. Sorry. So they've got penis cancer. Like it feels like there's too many variables for me to answer this well. So they have penis cancer, but they also
right.
And they get their dicks cut off to solve the cancer?
Yeah, right. They got their dicks cut off to solve the cancer, and then they have phantom pain.
Okay.
So then they go to a doctor and they say, I want penis relief pills. So my pain stops, like painkillers specifically for my dick.
Right.
Right. And because of that, there's a 60% reduction rate in suicide. Does that prove that there were penises that they had?
This just doesn't really track for me. So like if they had their dicks cut off and then they took a pill and it relieved the phantom pain, I don't think anyone would be saying that now proves that their dicks exist when they're clearly cut off, right? What would be more analogous to a trans situation is their dicks get cut off, they have phantom limb pain, and then we basically use like prosthetics and cadavers to build them like a non-functional aesthetic dick. And that aesthetic dick solves their phantom pain. And then the question would be, well, do they have a dick? And the answer is like, yeah, but not quite a dick in the way that they did before, but they still have a dick. Does that make sense?
I'm not comparing the dick of a trans woman or a trans man, whatever, to the penile cancer here. The penile cancer is meant to represent the trans stuff. So I'll do the analogy again. Let's say that. Sorry?
I am understanding. I think the issue is that the analogy is breaking down at the comparisons because I think the comparisons fall apart essentially.
Why do they fall apart?
Because in this case, what we're saying is that we're solving the cancer by, I'm not sure what, right? In the case of transness, we're solving the transness, whatever that is, the medical condition of transness, by the medical treatment of transitioning. In your analogy, I guess it would be similar to we're solving the transness by cutting off the dick because the dick is causing like the issues. So the additional phantom limb pain.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
I understand that. It's just I'm saying that the analogy is kind of falling apart because if transness is represented in this analogy by cancer, then the treatment for transness would be the dick cut off, not the phantom pain pill treatment afterwards. That would be something separate that I'm not sure where it would fall onto.
No. The dick cut off thing is essentially meant to be like a pre-established. So I'm just trying to give you an explanation of a bunch of men that have phantom pain. That's essentially, we could do a chopped arm off and then say painkiller specifically for our arms that have been chopped off.
Fuck.
Let me give the analogy one more time. Let's say that 1,000 men have had their hands chopped off, and because of that, in war, let's say, or whatever the reason is, and because of that, they have a very high suicide rate because they miss their left hand.
Yep.
right? So a thousand of those people that got their hand chopped off go to a doctor and say, "Give me painkillers because I constantly feel pain in my left hand.
Yeah.
I'm constantly suffering." The doctor gives them that left hand painkiller, and because of that, there is now a reduction of 60% of suicide. Does that mean that they had a left hand?
No, but nobody's saying that they did. Well,
Right,
yes, it kind of does.
And I would say that nobody's saying that they're trans.
Everybody is saying that they're trans, right? In the case, did
Yeah,
they
but
have?
that's the disagreement.
I think the reason why this analogy is falling apart is because in this case, right, what would be more analogous would be like if they have a hand, it gets cut off and they have phantom pain. The question isn't, did they have a left hand or not? Because the answer A would be yes, they used to, but that's not what the analogy is going for. If the phantom pain is solved with the pill, the question would be, does the pill now mean that suddenly they have a left hand? And the answer would be no, right? But in this case, what we're doing isn't giving trans people pills to make them not feel trans anymore. We're giving them a whole new hand so that they don't feel phantom pain anymore.
Oh, give a prosthetic hand instead of a pill. Does that make the analogy more analogous?
I think it makes it closer because then the question would be, would people kind of recognize the prosthetic hand as a hand? And the answer is most people would. They would just acknowledge that it's different than like a normal biological hand, which most people also do, right?
Okay, so I guess so how would I respond to this? I guess in a sense I would agree that trans women are real in that context, I guess in that particular context. But at the same time, I feel like there is still not a left hand. It's still a prosthetic.
Sure, but say the prosthetic, we can tap it into the nerve system so that they can control it, right? Say the technology steadily improves over the next 30 years for all of these poor left hand missing people, right? The reality is that increasingly the prosthetic hand would increasingly perform as a hand. And this is kind of the transhumanist argument. At some point, the performance is compelling enough that we would essentially decreasingly be able to even tell the difference between the prosthetic hand and a real hand, which is more or less what trans people are advocating for. They are trying to perform as though they actually have a left hand, even though, say, they were born without. And they are working on getting better science so that their prosthetic left hand looks better over time because they identify as a person who does have a left hand, essentially. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I get the argument. Going back to your original statement, you said that if the trans affirmative care is working, and 60%, how do I account for this if not being trans, correct? That was the original question?
I don't remember, if I'm being honest. I'm a little sleepy. I can just grant it.
You asked me, I think you asked me that if trans people aren't real, then how do I explain that giving them trans affirmative care reduces their suicide by 60%, which I've granted that is I've granted that it's a world-changing number, sure.
Yeah, well, essentially, if transness isn't causing the suicidality and it's being treated by transitioning, what the fuck is going on? What else would we call it if not transness?
I guess no. I guess my issue with that statement is that, to me, when you start other people in your suicidal tendencies, it stops being like you stop being a victim kind of thing. This is a broader viewpoint that I have, which is that if you engage in a suicidal activity, but then you say, you need to do X or I'll kill myself, I don't accept that as a valid answer.
Sure, but this is a This isn't because doing X doesn't alleviate the suicide. This is more of the Petersonian answer of saying, you cannot compel me to do actions I do not otherwise wish to do, right? That's not the same thing as saying that they don't need it, right? So like if you have a person and they are, if we're using suicide, say I have a suicidal person and they're like, if you break up with me, I will kill myself, right? You still have the choice to do it. And I also would basically be like, sorry, bub, emotional abuse isn't going to make me stay with you. But that doesn't mean that they're illegitimate in saying that the distress caused by the breakup might actually lead them to attempt. I'm just not going to comply with it. But that's not because I'm denying their suicidality. It's because I am denying their weaponization of suicidality to change my behavior, my freedom of expression, essentially. Which I think is fine to do. I actually reject the idea that you like forced pronouns, that you must use pronouns. I always thought that was a really bad idea, but I think it's a nice thing to give people their pronouns. I think when trans people say, hey, I just need this, can we develop it? And then a bunch of doctors go, of course we can. I think that that's all fine, because most doctors that are doing this are doing it voluntarily and willingly. And that's all well and good. I don't think most trans people are like holding a gun to people's head being like, transition me or I'll fucking blow your head off, right? That's like not happening by and large.
Yeah, sure. I don't disagree with that. But the issue here is that the reality here is we are living in a society. If it's acceptable as an identity and real thing, then I'm by and large forced to pay a chunk of my taxes towards trans people. So I do feel like there is a hypothetical gun to my head, at least in every instance, not just trans people, but in a majority of instances. Does that make sense?
No, I'm so sorry. I got distracted and your audio's breaking up super hard. Let's maybe just wrap it up though so we can get to the next person. Is that okay? I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I will final statement, discussion, maybe like last 20 minutes. I'm not sure if you're aware of Destiny's reason behind believing in trans people, but Destiny gives an argument like trans people, there are male brains and there are female brains inside male bodies and female bodies, and when you have discongruent of that, then you might suffer from gender dysphoria, and because of that you might need to transition.
Yeah, gotcha. I don't know. The evidence on like male and female brains is a little bit more complicated in my opinion, mostly because brains are more complicated than that. There's some really robust evidence suggesting that that's the case and some robust evidence suggesting that that's not the case. And to be honest, I think when it comes to like identity and these and like sexuality and these types of major questions, I think fundamentally we don't know enough about the brain yet to solve those questions. So I don't really find that a compelling argument. I find it emergent from the sequelae of the effects of the phenomenon, essentially the psychological distress, the consistent symptomology, and the consistent alleviation from the distress with specific treatment. The same reason I believe in transness for the same reason that I believe in multiple other kind of like emergent mental constructs, such as like extroversion.
Okay, so if something or something, and there were like, sorry?
I just said like extroversion. Unfortunately, I think you're pinging out a little bit too much, so I am going to move on to the next person. But thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I'm sorry that the audio is delayed like it was.